The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes in that hospital bed wasn't my husband's face. It was a text notification lighting up a cracked phone screen someone had set on the tray table beside me. Amex Business Platinum. $6,214 charge approved, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. I remember staring at it, my mouth dry as chalk, tubes taped to the back of my hand, and thinking I was still dreaming. Then a second notification slid down under the first. Then a third. I was 3 days out of emergency surgery, and somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, my family was boarding a ship with my money. When I finally got my husband on the phone, his voice was too relaxed, too breezy for a man whose wife had almost died. "Mark," I whispered, "where are you?" "At work, babe. Crazy day. Everything okay?" Behind him, so clear I could have sworn it was in the room with me, a woman's voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to your muster stations for the safety drill." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just listened to my husband lie to me from a boat. "My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34. I run a small design studio out of a converted spare bedroom. And up until 11 days ago, I would have told you my marriage, while not perfect, was solid. Real. The kind you build slowly out of Tuesday night dishes and shared bank statements, not the kind you see in movies. I married Mark 8 years ago. He came with a daughter, Zoe, who was 8 at the time and has grown into a sharp, guarded 16-year-old who calls me Claire, not Mom, and I've never pushed her on that. Her biological mother, Lauren, lives in Arizona and sees her twice a year. For all the ways Mark and I have struggled, I love that kid like she's mine, and for a long time, I believe she loved me back. Mark's mother, Diane, never fully warmed to me. She's the type of woman who compliments your haircut and somehow makes it sound like an insult. "You look so put together for someone who works from home," she told me once, at a Thanksgiving I'd spent 4 hours cooking for. Mark's sister, Renata, is louder about it. She said outright, more than once, after a couple of glasses of wine, that Mark married up and that it must be nice, not having to worry about money like the rest of us. Here's the thing about that comment. It wasn't wrong, exactly. My studio, Bennett Creative, does well. I built it from nothing starting in my 20s, and by the time Mark and I got serious, I was the one with equity, with retirement accounts, with a business credit line I'd fought hard to earn. Mark worked steadily as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, made decent money, and for years that balance worked fine. We weren't the money couple, or the broke couple. We were just a couple. Until about 3 months before I ended up in that hospital bed, when something shifted, and I didn't see it happening until it was already too late. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my client call day, and I just left a meeting downtown with a boutique hotel chain that wanted a full rebrand, a good contract, the kind that would set the studio up for a strong quarter. I was driving home on Route 9 a little after 7, replaying the meeting in my head, when a pickup truck ran the red light at Danforth and 6th doing what police later estimated was 55 miles an hour. I don't remember the impact. I remember the hotel meeting. And then I remember waking up to fluorescent lights and a stranger's hands pressing on my abdomen, someone shouting a blood pressure number that didn't sound like a number a person should survive. The driver who hit me was over twice the legal limit. He walked away with a broken wrist. I walked away, barely, with a ruptured spleen, internal bleeding they didn't catch fully on the first scan, and an emergency splenectomy that turned into 6 hours on the table instead of 2 because I coded once during surgery. They put me in a medically induced coma for 4 days to let my body stop trying to die. For days. I want you to sit with that, because it matters for everything that comes after. For entire days where I did not exist to the world, where the only thing keeping me tethered to it was a ventilator and a trauma surgeon named Dr. Okafor who, I'd learn later, told my husband on day 2 that my odds weren't guaranteed. And somewhere in those 4 days, while machines were breathing for me, my family was packing suitcases. I came out of sedation on a Saturday morning. The first face I saw wasn't Mark's. It was a nurse named Patty, mid-50s, kind eyes, who told me later she'd been the one to sit with me the longest because your people weren't really around much, hon. I didn't understand what she meant yet. I was too busy being confused about why I couldn't feel my legs properly, why my throat felt like sandpaper from the tube, why the room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee instead of anything familiar. "Where's my husband?" I asked, or tried to, It came out as barely a rasp. Patty checked something on her tablet. He was here Tuesday night, when you came in. And I believe Wednesday morning, briefly. She paused in a way that told me she was choosing her words carefully. Do you want me to call him? Please. She dialed a number from my chart and handed me the phone. It rang 4 times before it went to voicemail. Mark's voice, cheerful, unbothered. You've reached Mark, leave a message. I hung up. Patty didn't say anything, but I saw her jaw tighten just slightly, the way people's faces do when they're holding back an opinion they're not paid to share. Is Zoe with him? My stepdaughter. I don't have a record of her visiting, no. Patty adjusted my 4-line, not quite meeting my eyes. Your mother-in-law came by once the first night. Signed some paperwork about your insurance. Haven't seen her since. I lay there absorbing that. 5 days in the hospital, 3 of them unconscious, sure, but still. And my husband couldn't manage more than 2 visits and a full day of radio silence. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Work emergency. Zoe's school thing. Something. I was still, even then, giving him the benefit of the doubt a wife gives a husband of 8 years. That benefit of the doubt lasted exactly until my phone, recovered from my belongings bag, screen spiderwebbed with a crack from the crash but still functional, buzzed in my hand with a bank notification I hadn't asked for and could not explain. Amex Business Platinum, ending in 4471. $6,214. Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. I read it 3 times. My business card. The one I built my studio's credit history on. The one Mark had access to as an authorized user, but only for household emergencies, capped at $2,000 a month, a limit we'd put in writing 2 years ago after an incident I'll get to. $6,214. To a cruise line. I sat up too fast and felt the staples in my abdomen pull, a hot line of pain that made me gasp. I fumbled the banking app open with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and that's when I saw the rest of it, stacking up like a slow-motion car wreck of its own. A charge from 3 days earlier, one I'd missed entirely while unconscious, for $4,180, the same cruise line, tagged as balance payment. Then, from that morning, a $340 charge from a duty-free shop, a $210 charge from something called Ocean Spa Services, a $96 charge for a photo package, Symphony of the Seas. My family was on a cruise ship. While I was in a hospital bed recovering from surgery that had nearly killed me, they were somewhere in the Caribbean, buying spa treatments and souvenir photo packages on my card. I called Mark again. This time he picked up on the second ring. Hey, hon, everything okay? Breezy. Unbothered. Like I was interrupting an ordinary afternoon. Where are you, Mark? At work, babe. Crazy day. Everything okay? And that's when I heard it, clear as anything, cutting through whatever background noise he thought he'd muted, a woman's voice over a loudspeaker, tinny and cheerful. Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to your muster stations for the mandatory safety drill. I didn't say anything for a long moment, long enough that he must have realized what I'd heard, because his voice changed, got faster, higher, the particular pitch of a man scrambling. Claire, you still there? Signal's bad on my end. You're on a boat. Silence. Actual, damning silence. 3 full seconds of it, before he said, I can explain. You're on a boat, I said again. And I'm in a hospital bed with staples in my stomach, and you told me you were at work. Claire, listen. I hung up, not out of strength, not some cinematic moment of clarity. I hung up because I was shaking too hard to hold the phone, and because I genuinely thought, for one disoriented second, that I might throw up. I didn't call Mark back. I called Zoe instead, because whatever else was true, I needed to hear that at least one person in that family hadn't simply erased me for a week. She picked up fast, the way teenagers do, like the phone was already in her hand. Claire! Oh my God! Hi, we've barely had signal. The ship's Wi-Fi is so... She stopped herself mid-sentence, and I heard it happen, heard the exact moment her brain caught up with her mouth. Wait! You're not on the boat! No, Zoe. I'm in the hospital. I've been in the hospital for 6 days. There was a pause, so long I thought the call had dropped. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped its brightness entirely. I thought, Dad said you were doing better. He said you were stable, and it was fine for us to still go, because canceling this late meant losing like $8,000 in deposits, and Grandma had already planned her whole birthday thing. And she stopped again. You sound really different than stable. I was in a coma for 4 days, Zoe. Oh my God. Her voice cracked. Oh my God, I didn't know that. Nobody told me that part. I believed her. That's the thing I want to be honest about. Of everyone in that family, Zoe was the only one who sounded genuinely gutted, genuinely blindsided, and it would matter later, that distinction. But in that moment, all I could focus on was the shape of what she just told me, that this wasn't some spontaneous, panicked decision made in a moment of chaos. Someone had made a calculation. Someone had weighed my hospital bed against $8,000 in deposits and decided the deposits mattered more. Who told you I was stable? I asked. Dad. And Grandma said it too. She said you'd probably sleep through most of the week anyway, and there was no point in everyone sitting around a waiting room doing nothing. Doing nothing. Being with your unconscious wife, your daughter-in-law who almost died, apparently qualified as doing nothing. Is your dad there? Right now. He's at the pool with Aunt Renata and Uncle Paul. Grandma's getting a massage, I think. I'm in the room. I told everyone I had a headache. A pause. Claire, I really am sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. I swear. I know, honey, I said, and I meant it, even as everything else in me was breaking apart. I need you to do something for me. Don't tell your dad we talked. Not yet. Okay. A beat. Are you going to be okay? I looked down at the 4-line taped to the back of my hand, at the bruising spreading yellow-green up my forearm, at the 6-day stubble of hospital isolation with no one there to help me feel human again. I don't know yet, I told her, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. I called Priya next. Priya Malhotra has been my best friend since college, and she's an ICU nurse at a different hospital across town, which meant 2 things. She understood exactly how serious my situation had been in a way most people wouldn't, and she was going to be furious in a very specific, informed way that most people also wouldn't be. She answered on the first ring, because Priya always answers on the first ring, and I got about 4 words into explaining before she cut me off. I'm coming. Don't say anything else, just, I'm coming. I'm getting in the car right now. She showed up 40 minutes later in scrubs from a shift she should have still been on, hair still in its work bun, carrying a tote bag with a phone charger, a hairbrush, decent shampoo, and a container of the lentil soup her mother makes that she keeps frozen for emergencies. She took one look at me, pale, alone, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon, and I watched her professional composure crack for just a second before she rebuilt it. Okay, she said, pulling a chair up to the bed. Start from the beginning. Everything. I told her about the crash, the coma, waking up alone, the charges, the call, the loudspeaker, Zoe. Priya listened with the particular stillness of someone doing math in her head, and when I finished, she didn't say what I expected. No immediate outrage. No, I'll kill him. Instead, she asked, quietly, Claire, when did Mark say he was going back to work? After his layoff. I stared at her. What layoff? Her face did something complicated. You didn't know. Know what, Priya? Raj ran into him at the grocery store about 10 weeks ago, middle of a weekday, and Mark said he was between things, making it sound casual like he'd quit. Raj assumed you knew and didn't think to mention it because it wasn't. It wasn't really our business. She reached for my hand, careful of the 4. I'm sorry. I should have said something. I didn't want to start something that wasn't mine to start. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something shift and resettle inside my chest, some foundational piece of my understanding of my own life quietly cracking. 10 weeks. Mark had been leaving the house every morning at 7:45 in a collared shirt for 10 weeks, and I had believed, without a second thought, that he was going to work. He's been lying to me for 10 weeks, I said slowly, and this whole time I thought the only thing wrong in this marriage was that his family doesn't like me very much. Priya squeezed my hand. I think, she said carefully, there's a lot more wrong than that. She was right. It would take another 4 days in that hospital bed, and a returning husband with sunburned shoulders and a gift shop keychain, for me to understand exactly how much more. Priya, being Priya, didn't just sit with me and be supportive. She started building a timeline, the same methodical way she'd chart a patient's vitals. She had her laptop out on the tray table within the hour, and between checking on me and stealing hospital coffee, she pulled together pieces I never would have found on my own. The first thing she found was public. A Facebook post from Renata, 3 weeks old, a countdown graphic. 7 sleeps until Symphony of the Seas. Ship Sun Mom's 65th deserves the best. With a comment thread full of relatives asking about excursions and packing lists. 3 weeks old. The cruise had been booked and planned long before I was anywhere near a hospital bed. This wasn't an impulsive decision made because you got hurt, Priya said, scrolling. This was already happening. The accident just happened to land in the middle of it. That reframed everything. I'd been picturing some horrible, spur-of-the-moment choice, my family panicking, grieving, making a terrible call under the fog of crisis. But this was planned, booked, paid a deposit on, which meant the real question wasn't why did they go ahead with the cruise after I got hurt. The real question was why was Mark's name on a cruise booking he'd apparently been planning for weeks, using money we didn't have, while lying to me about having a job. I called the credit union that Friday afternoon and asked for a full transaction history going back 4 months. Not just the Amex, but our joint checking, and the house fund, savings account we'd been building for a down payment on a bigger place, the one with $31,000 in it the last time I checked, back in April. It took 2 days for the statements to come through, because apparently requesting your own financial records while recovering from a splenectomy is not a fast process. When they did, Priya read them out loud to me in the hospital room while I lay there with my eyes closed, absorbing each number like a small physical blow. The house fund, which had held $31,000 in April, held $6,200 by the time I checked. Over 11 weeks, in withdrawals ranging from $400 to $4,000, someone had drained $25,000 out of an account that required both our signatures to open, but as it turned out, only one signature to withdraw from, a detail from the original paperwork I'd genuinely forgotten. Where did it go? I asked, though some sick part of me already suspected. Priya scrolled further. Some of it's a payment to a company called Apex Fantasy League. That's gambling. Claire, that's a sports betting platform. Some of it's a wire transfer, $4,000, to an account labeled D. Bennett. Diane, my mother-in-law's initial. And the rest, Priya said quietly, looks like it went to a travel agency called Coastal Voyage Travel. Multiple payments, adding up to about $17,000. Mark hadn't just spent the cruise money on our shared card while I was unconscious. He'd been quietly funding this trip, and God knows what else, for 2.5 months, using a job he no longer had as cover, and our house fund as the wallet. And when the final balance came due and he didn't have enough left to cover it, he turned to the one account he technically still had access to mine. Here's the part of the story that matters most, the detail that would end up deciding everything that came after. 2 years before any of this happened, Mark and I sat down with a financial counselor. It wasn't my idea originally. It was our marriage counselor's suggestion, after an incident where Mark racked up $3,800 in fantasy football losses on a card I didn't know he had access to, and I found out only when a collections call came to our house. We fought about it for a month. We nearly separated over it. Actually, it was the closest we'd come, in 8 years, to genuinely considering divorce. But Mark cried, apologized, said gambling had gotten its hooks into him after a rough stretch at work, promised to get help, and I believed him, because I loved him, and because 8 years is a long time to build with someone. Part of rebuilding trust was structural, not just emotional. We drew up a written household finance agreement, nothing fancy. No lawyers, just a signed document our counselor helped us draft that specified exactly how shared accounts worked. Mark would remain an authorized user on my Amex Business Platinum, but only for verified household emergencies, capped at $2,000 per month, with a text notification sent to both our phones for any charge over $200. The house fund required both signatures for withdrawals over $500, a rule that, we'd later discover, the bank had somehow failed to properly implement on their end, a clerical gap Mark had apparently discovered and quietly exploited. I kept a signed copy of that agreement in a folder in my home office. I'd nearly forgotten it existed. Priya, when I told her about it, sat up straight. Claire, that's not just a marriage document. That's basically a contract establishing exactly what Mark was and wasn't authorized to do with your card. If he charged $18,000 to a cruise line using authorized user access that explicitly excludes non-emergency, non-household spending, she stopped herself, softening. I'm not a lawyer, but I know someone who is. That someone was Sophia Reyes, a consumer finance attorney and the sister of one of Priya's co-workers, who agreed to a phone consultation the following morning, squeezed in during her lunch break. While I lay in the step-down unit with the agreement scanned and emailed to her, my bank statements printed out beside me like evidence at a trial I hadn't known I was building. This is actually a fairly clean case, Sophia told me, her voice crisp and unhurried in a way I found strangely comforting. You have a signed agreement, limiting authorized use. You have a documented medical incapacitation during the exact window the charges occurred. Your hospital records will show precisely when you were unconscious versus lucid, down to the hour, which matters enormously here. And you have a pattern of unauthorized withdrawals from a jointly titled account that required, by agreement if not by the bank's own enforcement, dual consent. What does that mean for me? Practically, it means, Sophia said, that you have real grounds to dispute every charge on that card as unauthorized use outside agreed terms, and potentially grounds to pursue your husband directly for the house fund withdrawals, separate from any divorce proceedings. It also means, frankly, that depending on how this settles, he could be looking at more than a hard conversation. Some of what you're describing, accessing funds during someone's medical incapacitation beyond documented authorization, can rise to the level a bank's fraud department takes seriously even if a family court never gets involved. I hung up that call and lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling tile with the water stain shaped like a comma that I'd memorized over the past week, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel yet. Not just grief, not just fury, but the cold, steadying click of a plan forming. Mark came to the hospital on a Wednesday, 9 days after the crash, 4 days after our call on the ship. He had a sunburn across his nose and the tops of his ears, the kind you get from a pool deck, not a work parking lot, and he was carrying a gift bag from the ship's souvenir shop. He set it on my tray table like a peace offering. Inside was a keychain, a little rubber life preserver with Symphony of the Seas printed on it in cheerful yellow letters, and a folded t-shirt that said "World's Okay, a Sailor." I looked at the keychain for a long moment. Then I looked at him. You bought me a souvenir, I said, from the vacation you paid for with my card while I was in a coma. His face did something complicated, a flicker of shame, quickly buried under defensiveness, a pattern I would come to recognize as fundamentally Mark. Claire, come on. Let me explain before you go nuclear on me. I'm listening. He pulled the chair up, the same one Priya had sat in days earlier, and ran a hand through his hair. The trip was already booked. Months ago. My mom's 65th, it's a big deal to her. And yeah, okay, I'll admit the timing with your accident was a nightmare, genuinely the worst luck, but Dr. Okafor told me you were stable by Thursday, out of the coma by Friday night. And I actually thought, that sitting in a waiting room for a week straight wasn't going to change your outcome. And canceling would have cost us $8,000 in non-refundable deposits we didn't have to lose. You told me you were at work. Because I panicked. Because I knew exactly how this was going to sound. And I was right, wasn't I? Because here we are. And the money, Mark. The $25,000 out of the house fund. The gambling withdrawals. The layoff you never told me about. I watched his face when I said it. Watched the color actually leave it. 10 weeks, Priya said. 10 weeks of you leaving the house every morning like you had somewhere to go. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, some of the bravado had drained out of his voice, leaving something smaller and more scared underneath it. I got laid off in a round of cuts. I didn't know how to tell you. You just landed that hotel contract. Everything was going right for you, and I felt like such a joke, telling you I'd lost my job right when your business was taking off. So I said I was going to work. Every day. I drove to the library. I applied to things. I told myself I'd have something lined up before you noticed. And then I didn't, and then more time passed, and it just got harder to say anything at all. So instead of telling me the truth, I said slowly, you drained our house fund into a fantasy sports app and a cruise, and then charged the rest to my card while I was in a medically induced coma because that felt easier than one honest conversation. When you say it like that, there's no other way to say it, Mark. He didn't have an answer for that. He sat there with his sunburned shoulders and his gift shop bag, and for the first time since I'd woken up, I felt something other than grief or fury. I felt calm. Cold, clear, terrible calm. "I need you to leave," I said. "Not just the room. I mean I need you to not be here when I'm discharged. I have somewhere else to go. Claire, you have 4 days to figure out where you're staying that isn't with me." Diane showed up the next afternoon, and if I'd hoped for even a shred of contrition, I was disappointed within the first 30 seconds. She swept in wearing sunglasses pushed up into freshly set hair, still tan from the cruise, and set her purse down on the visitor chair before she'd even looked at me properly. "Mark tells me you're being dramatic about the trip." "I'm sorry, what?" "You were unconscious, Claire. You didn't know we were there, or not there. The doctors said you were stable. What exactly did you want us to do? Sit in a hallway for a week feeling sorry for ourselves? That's not going to make your spleen heal faster." I stared at her, genuinely searching for words, and found something like awe at the sheer, unbothered confidence of the woman. "You wired yourself $4,000 from our house fund, Diane. That at least landed." Her chin lifted a fraction. A tell I recognized from Mark, the exact same defensive posture. "That was a loan. Mark offered to help cover my portion of the trip since I'm on a fixed income now, and he said it was fine, that it was his and Claire's money too. It wasn't his to offer. It was ours for a house, and half of ours is mine, and I was never asked." "Well," she adjusted her purse strap, unbothered. "I'll be honest with you, Claire, since we're being honest today. I never fully understood why Mark chose someone so particular about money, counting every dollar, needing agreements signed like you're running a business instead of a marriage. Some of us grew up believing family helps family without a contract attached. And there it was, the actual truth underneath 8 years of polite tension, finally said out loud. Diane didn't see the finance agreement as a boundary born from a real breach of trust. She saw it as an insult, a sign that I'd never fully accepted her son, her family, into the unguarded generosity she believed family deserved. She'd spent 2.5 months encouraging Mark to quietly bankroll her birthday cruise with money that wasn't fully his to give, and even now, faced with the aftermath, her only regret seemed to be that I'd found out. "Diane," I said, and I made myself say it slowly, clearly, so there could be no confusion later about what was said in that room. "You helped my husband hide a layoff from me for 10 weeks, encouraged him to drain a house fund I've been contributing to for 3 years, and told him it was fine to charge my business card while I was in a coma because, and I'm quoting you, I was being dramatic. I don't think we're going to find common ground here today." She picked her purse back up, sunglasses sliding down over her eyes like a curtain closing. "I hope you know how this is going to look to the rest of the family. Punishing Mark for one mistake, after everything he's given up for you over the years." I almost laughed. Almost. What has he given up, exactly? She didn't have an answer for that either. She just left, the click of her heels against hospital linoleum the last sound in the room before the door swung shut, and I lay there thinking that if I'd needed any final piece of confirmation that this family had never truly made room for me, I'd just gotten it, delivered with a tan and a designer purse. That night was the lowest point. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this sometimes skip past the ugly middle, the part where you're not righteous or clear-eyed yet, just shattered. It was maybe 11 o'clock, the hallway lights dimmed, my roommate behind the curtain snoring softly, and I lay there running through 8 years like I was auditing them for the first time. The early ones, when Mark used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror before work. The trip to Vermont for our 2nd anniversary, the two of us splitting a bottle of wine on a cabin porch, him telling me he'd never felt safe with anyone the way he felt safe with me. Zoe's 10th birthday, when she'd hugged me first, before her own father, and I'd cried in the bathroom afterward from the sheer relief of finally feeling like I belonged somewhere. Had any of that been real? Or had I just been useful? A stable paycheck, a well-run household, a woman who kept her promises so consistently that no one ever had to worry she'd stop? I thought about Diane's words, someone so particular about money, and felt the old, familiar poison of self-doubt start to seep in. Maybe I had been too rigid. Maybe the agreement, the caps, the signatures. Maybe that had been its own kind of failure. A wall I'd built that told Mark, on some level, that I never fully trusted him, and maybe that mistrust had become a self-fulfilling thing. I was still awake, tangled in that thought, when Priya texted at 11:40 p.m., unprompted, like she'd somehow known. "You up?" "Yeah," I wrote back, spiraling a little. She called instead of texting. "Tell me what's in your head." I told her, the doubt, the guilt, Diane's voice looping in my mind like a skipping record. Priya listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something I've held on to since. "Claire, you didn't ask your husband to lie about his job for 10 weeks. You didn't ask him to gamble away your house fund or fly to the Caribbean while you were unconscious in an ICU. A boundary that exists because someone already broke your trust once isn't the reason they broke it again. That's not how this works. You're not the common denominator in every person in that family failing you. They are." I don't think I fully believed her that night, but I held on to the sentence anyway. The way you hold onto a rope you're not sure will take your weight, because it's the only thing within reach. I was discharged 4 days later, 12 days total since the crash, with a folder of discharge paperwork, a prescription for pain medication I mostly didn't take, and a body that still ached with every careful step. Priya picked me up. Mark texted twice that morning. "What time do they release you? I can come," and I didn't answer either message. I didn't go home. I went to Priya's guest room, a space with a daybed and a window that looked out over her small backyard garden, and I stayed there for the next 3 weeks while I figured out what came next. The work with Sophia moved faster than I expected. Because the hospital's electronic records timestamped my sedation and unconsciousness down to the minute, and because every disputed charge on the Amex lined up cleanly against that window, and because our signed household finance agreement explicitly excluded travel and entertainment spending from Mark's authorized use, Amex's fraud department sided with me within 11 days of my formal dispute. Every charge tied to the cruise, $18,340 in total once you added the excursions, the spa, the duty-free shopping, the photo package, was reversed off my account and reassigned as Mark's personal liability since he'd exceeded and violated the explicit terms of his authorized user access. The house fund was Messier, since it lived in a joint account with our credit union rather than a card with fraud protections built in. Sophia's advice was to pursue it as part of divorce proceedings rather than as a separate claim, since untangling, authorized joint account from fraud, in a shared marital account is legally murkier than a clearly defined business credit card. But she made sure it was documented. Every withdrawal, every date, every dollar, folded into the larger financial disclosure that would matter enormously once I filed. And I did file. 3.5 weeks after I woke up alone in that hospital bed, I sat in Sophia's office and signed divorce papers citing financial deception and misuse of marital and personal assets, my hand steadier than I expected it to be. Mark's response, when he was served, was to call me 11 times in 2 hours and then send a single text. "I lost my job and I panicked, and I know that's not an excuse, but you're really going to end 8 years over a cruise?" I looked at that message for a long time before I answered. "I'm not ending 8 years over a cruise," I wrote back. "I'm ending it because you let me almost die alone and then lied to my face about it while I was still healing." The cruise was just the part one could prove. He didn't respond to that. There wasn't really anything left to say. Word travels fast in families like Mark's, and by the time the divorce filing became common knowledge, Renata had already fired the first shot in the family group chat, a message insisting I was punishing everyone for Mark's mistakes and airing private business by involving lawyers, sent to a thread that included aunts, cousins, and Mark's father's second wife, none of whom, as far as I could tell, had heard a single accurate detail about what had actually happened. I wasn't in that group chat anymore. I'd been removed, quietly, sometime during the cruise itself, which told its own story. But Zoe was, and Zoe, 16 years old and furious on my behalf in a way that genuinely moved me, took screenshots of my actual hospital admission timeline, the disputed charge list Sophia had helped me compile for the fraud claim, and the receipts showing the cruise had been booked and funded weeks before my accident, and posted them into that same group chat with a message of her own. "You should all know what actually happened before you decide who to be mad at." The fallout was immediate and, I'll admit, deeply satisfying in a way I try not to feel too proud of. Mark's uncle called him directly to ask if it was true he'd been unreachable for 4 days of his wife's medically induced coma. His father's second wife sent me a private message, unprompted, that just said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You deserved So much better than this. Renata went quiet in the thread entirely, and Diane, from what Zoe told me later, spent a solid week insisting the screenshots were taken out of context to anyone who would still listen, which by then was almost no one. Mark, for his part, lost more than the group chat sympathy. The fraud reversal on the Amex, combined with the collapse of the house fund and mounting credit card debt from the gambling, put him in a financial hole he had no job and no plan to climb out of. He moved in with Diane within a month, a fact that struck me, when I heard it, as a strange kind of poetic justice, the two of them together in the house where all of this had apparently been encouraged in the first place. Zoe chose to stay with me during the divorce proceedings, an arrangement Sophia helped formalize even though I wasn't her legal parent, built on the practical reality that Mark had no stable housing in Lauren, in Arizona, agreed it was better for Zoe to finish her junior year without uprooting her life. Some nights she'd sit at Priya's kitchen table doing homework while I worked on client mock-ups across from her, and neither of us said much about it. But there was something steady building between us in that quiet, unforced way that mattered more than any conversation could have. "I keep thinking about the keychain," she told me once, out of nowhere, staring at her chemistry textbook. "The one Dad brought you. Will's okay as sailor," or whatever the shirt said. "What about it? It's just, that's such a small, dumb gift for what he did. Like he thought a $5 keychain could cover it." She shook her head. "I don't think he ever actually understood how bad it was. I don't think he still does." I thought about that for a long time after she said it, and I think she was right. It's been 8 months now since I woke up to that first notification lighting up a cracked phone screen. I want to tell you it got easier quickly, and it didn't. There were weeks that fall where I'd sit in Priya's guest room at midnight, still doing the math on how 8 years could end with a $5 keychain, still catching myself reaching for my phone to text Mark something mundane before remembering there was no one on the other end of that number anymore who I trusted. But I want to tell you what came after, too, because I think that's the part worth staying for. The divorce finalized in the spring, 6 months after I filed, with a settlement that reflected the financial misconduct clearly enough that Sophia called it about as clean a win as this kind of case gets. I got the house fund contributions restored through the settlement, along with a share of Mark's remaining assets that, combined with the reversed cruise charges, meant I came out of the marriage financially whole in a way I genuinely hadn't expected when I first read that $6,000 notification from a hospital bed. Bennett Creative grew, too, in a way I can't fully explain except to say that grief and fury are apparently excellent fuel for ambition. I landed 2 more hotel chain clients off the strength of that first rebrand, hired my first full-time employee, a sharp 26-year-old named Oscar who reminds me a little of myself at that age, and moved the studio out of the spare bedroom and into an actual small office downtown with a window and a door I can close. I bought a condo of my own that fall, a 2-bedroom with a second room that's technically an office, but that Zoe has slowly, unofficially claimed as hers, complete with a string of fairy lights she put up without asking and a growing pile of art supplies on the desk. She stays with me most weekends now, an arrangement that started as practical and became, somewhere along the way, something closer to family. Not the replacement kind, not competing with Lauren or even with whatever relationship she still maintains with Mark, but its own separate, real thing. Mark and I speak rarely, mostly through Zoe's logistics. Pickup times, school events. He's working again, a smaller sales role, still living with Diane last I heard. He reached out once, about 4 months after the divorce finalized, a long text about how he'd been doing a lot of reflecting and hoped we could someday be friends. I read it twice and didn't answer. Some doors don't need slamming to stay closed. They just need you to stop checking if they're locked. I still have the keychain. I kept it, actually, which surprises people when I tell them. It sits in a small dish on my dresser, next to my house keys, this cheap little rubber life preserver that says Symphony of the Seas in fading yellow letters. I don't keep it out of sentiment. I keep it because every morning when I grab my keys, I see it for half a second, and I remember exactly what it costs to learn the difference between people who show up for you and people who send a souvenir instead. Priya asked me once, not long after everything settled, whether I regretted the finance agreement Mark and I signed 2 years before any of this happened, whether Diane's words had ever really left me, that particular accusation about being too guarded, too careful, not generous enough with the people I loved. I told her the truth, That agreement is the only reason any of this ended the way it did. Without it, without the caps, the notifications, the dual signatures the bank had failed to enforce but that existed on paper regardless, I would have had no clean claim, no fraud reversal, no clear line between what Mark was allowed to do and what he did anyway. The boundary I'd built out of an old betrayal ended up being the exact thing that protected me from a much bigger one. I think about that a lot now, how the things we build to protect ourselves after we've been hurt once aren't weakness, and they aren't distrust dressed up as caution. They're just wisdom, learned the hard way, waiting quietly to matter again. I didn't build that agreement because I expected my husband to abandon me in a hospital bed and fund a family vacation on my dime while I was unconscious. I built it because I'd learned, once, that love without boundaries isn't generosity. It's just an open door for anyone who wants to walk through it and take what they want. I paid a terrible price to learn that lesson twice. But I'm the one still standing in the house I bought myself, running the business I built myself, raising a relationship with a stepdaughter who chose to stay even when her own father didn't fight for either of us. And somewhere across town, in his mother's spare bedroom, my ex-husband still has a photo package from a cruise he can't really afford to remember, from a week he spent poolside while I fought alone, to survive something that should have brought him running. I don't need an apology from him anymore. I got something better, the truth, the receipts, and my life back, in that exact order.